My mother begged me to fly home for the holidays, crying that she missed me. After a 10-hour flight, she opened the door with no hug, no hello, just a demand to babysit my sister's kids while they went on a luxury trip. I smiled and said one thing that made them lose their minds. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I was kneeling on the bathroom floor of my apartment, clutching the rim of the toilet, when my phone lit up on the tile beside me. The nausea had been rolling through me in waves for the better part of an hour, something I'd eaten, or maybe just the exhaustion of 90-hour weeks catching up to me at last. My forehead was pressed against the cool porcelain, and I was whispering to myself, "Just breathe, Amelia, just breathe," when the ringtone cut through the silence like a blade. I turned my head just enough to see the screen. Mom. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. The larger part of me, the part that still ached with the old, familiar hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different, reached out with a trembling hand and answered. "Amelia, Amelia, are you there?" Her voice was thick, wobbling, layered with something that sounded dangerously close to tears. "I'm here, Mom." I pushed myself up slowly, leaning my back against the wall. The tile was cold through my thin shirt. "What's wrong?" It's the holidays, sweetheart. It's Christmas, and you're not here. You haven't been here in 2 years. I miss you so much it hurts." A sniffle, a shaky breath. "Your father misses you. Diane asks about you all the time. The kids don't even know who you are anymore, Amelia. Don't you want them to know their aunt?" I closed my eyes. The guilt landed exactly where it was aimed, square in the center of my chest, right on the old scar tissue that had never quite healed over. It was a precision strike, the kind my mother had been perfecting for decades. "I know, Mom, I've just been busy. I know, you're always busy." A pause carefully staged. "But sweetheart, I'm asking you. I'm not demanding, I'm asking. Please come home, just for the holidays. We need you here, I need you here." Her voice cracked on that last part, and something inside me cracked with it. I was 34 years old, a corporate attorney at a firm that chewed people up and spat them out before their second year. I had fought for every inch of ground I'd gained. I hadn't been home in 2 years because every time I went home, I left feeling smaller, diminished, like I'd been folded up and stuffed into a box labeled the less important daughter. But she was crying. My mother was crying and asking me to come home, and no matter how many times I told myself I knew better, that voice still had a key to something deep inside me. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, Mom. I'll come." The relief that poured through the phone was almost theatrical. "Oh, thank God. Thank you, Amelia. You won't regret it, I promise. It's going to be wonderful. The whole family together again. It's all I've wanted." I hung up the phone and sat on that cold bathroom floor for a long time, staring at nothing, wondering why the victory of saying yes felt so much like defeat. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The next 72 hours were a blur of logistics and expense. I reorganized my case files, begged a favor from my colleague Marcus to cover my pending motions, and booked a last-minute flight that cost more than my monthly car payment. 10 hours. A red-eye from Chicago to Portland, with a layover in Denver that was just long enough to make me think about turning around and short enough to make sure I couldn't. I landed at Portland International at 6 in the morning on Christmas Eve, running on 4 hours of fitful airplane sleep and a stale coffee that had tasted like regret. My carry-on was digging into my shoulder. My coat was too heavy for the mild Pacific air, and I was sweating by the time I dragged myself and my suitcase through the arrival's terminal toward the exit. The taxi ride to my parents' house took 40 minutes. I watched the familiar landscape roll by, the strip malls that had been there since my childhood, the old church with the stained glass windows, the park where Diane and I used to play before we learned that love in our family came with conditions. Every landmark was a memory, and every memory was a small, sharp ache. When the taxi pulled up to the house, I sat for a moment just looking at it. It looked the same. The same white siding, the same green shutters, the same wreath on the front door that my mother bought at a craft fair 15 years ago and refused to replace. The same home that had never quite felt like mine, even when I lived in it. I paid the driver, hauled my suitcase up the walkway, and stood at the door. I took a breath. I straightened my coat. I told myself that this time maybe it would be different. Maybe this time when the door opened there would be warmth. I knocked. The door swung open almost immediately, as if she'd been standing right behind it waiting, my mother, Margaret. She was dressed beautifully, a deep red blouse, dark slacks, her hair freshly done, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was going somewhere. I smiled, my heart rising in my chest. "Hi, Mom." "No," she held up a hand. "Listen, Diane's kids are in the living room. Emma's still in her pajamas. She'll need lunch around 11 and a nap by 1. The boys will eat anything you put in front of them, but don't give them juice after 2 or they'll be bouncing off the walls until midnight. We'll be back by tomorrow evening." I blinked. The words didn't make sense. They were just sounds, disjointed and strange, like a foreign language I'd once studied but had long forgotten. "I'm sorry, what?" "We're going on a family trip," she said, as if she were telling me the weather. "Diane and Richard and I to the lodge at Candlewood Point. Your father got a great deal on a suite. We're leaving in 20 minutes. "A family trip," I repeated. The words tasted like ash. "Yes, and you'll babysit your sister's kids while we're gone." She turned away from me, already reaching for her coat on the hook by the door. "I left the emergency numbers on the fridge. There's leftover casserole in the oven." "Mom, I just flew 10 hours. "I know, sweetheart. That's why this works out perfectly. You'll be here, the kids will be here, and we'll get some much-needed family time." She paused, just long enough to glance back at me with a look that was not affectionate. It was appraising, evaluating, like she was confirming that the piece of furniture she'd ordered had arrived and was in the right room. It's really very convenient. She didn't hug me, she didn't welcome me, she didn't even take my suitcase. In that moment, standing in the doorway of a house that had never been my home, I felt something shift inside me. Not the old crack, the one that guilt always found. Something else. Something harder. Something that had been building for 34 years, through every dismissed achievement, every forgotten birthday, every moment I'd been treated not as a daughter, but as a resource to be deployed. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I set my suitcase down in the entryway and walked past my mother into the living room, where 3 small children were scattered across the carpet like fallen leaves. Emma, the 2-year-old, was sitting in a diaper, methodically pulling the arms off a plastic doll. The boys, Tyler, 4, and Noah, 6, were locked in a battle over a tablet that neither of them seemed willing to share. The room smelled like stale cereal and dirty diapers. No one looked up. No one said, "Aunt Amelia." I stood there, watching them, and my mind drifted backward despite myself. I thought about all the years I had given to this family. The summers I'd spent working at the local grocery store at 16, handing my paychecks directly to my mother because the household needs it more than you need new clothes. The college fund I'd built for myself through scholarships and 3 part-time jobs, which my mother had tried to redirect to Diane because she's not as academic as you, Amelia. She needs the help. The law school loans I was still paying off because my parents had insisted they couldn't contribute a dime, only for me to discover, years later, that they'd taken out a second mortgage on the house to fund Diane's wedding. I had swallowed all of it, every slight, every erasure. I had convinced myself over and over again that love meant sacrifice, that if I just gave enough, endured enough, eventually the scale would tip and I would be seen. Valued. Wanted for me, not for what I could provide. And now here I was, 10 hours on a plane, thousands of dollars, 2 years of absence, and the only reason I'd been summoned was because they needed a babysitter. "Deanne," I said calmly, turning toward the kitchen, where my younger sister was filling a thermos with coffee, her designer handbag slung over her shoulder, her hair pinned in an immaculate updo. Diane looked up. She had the same sharp features as our mother, the same calculating gaze, but none of the softness that Margaret could at least feign when it served her. Diane didn't bother with pretense. She looked at me the way a project manager looks at a temp worker, assessed, assigned, and dismissed. "Oh, good, you're here," she said. "Emma's been fussy all morning. I think she's cutting a molar. The boys should be fine as long as you keep them away from the cookie jar. Mom told you about the schedule, right?" "She told me." "Perfect." She capped her thermos and smiled, but it wasn't a smile meant for me. It was a smile meant for herself, the satisfied expression of someone whose problem had been neatly solved. "You're a lifesaver, Amelia, truly." "Where's Dad?" I asked. "Garage, getting the car packed." She glanced at her watch. "We should really go. The check-in at the lodge is at noon, and you know how traffic gets on the coastal road this time of year." My mother appeared behind me, her coat now buttoned, a scarf artfully arranged around her neck. She was already moving toward the door, her eyes on her phone, not on me. "Mom," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried. She paused just barely. "Yes." "You begged me to come home. You said you missed me. You said we needed to be together as a family." "And we will be," she said lightly, still typing something on her screen. "When we get back tomorrow, we'll have a lovely Christmas Eve dinner, just the 5 of us. Well, 8 with the kids." "The 5 of us," I repeated, "meaning you, Dad, Diane, and me." "Of course." "And the kids." "Obviously." "So I'm included in the family, just not in the family trip." She looked up then, finally. Her eyes met mine, and for a flicker of a second I saw it, the flash of something sharp and cold behind the warmth she performed so well. It was there and then it was gone, replaced by a patient, weary expression, the look of a woman who believed her daughter was being difficult on purpose. "Amelia, you just got off a plane. You're tired. The kids will be a nice distraction. You can rest here, spend time with your nieces and nephew, and we'll have a proper celebration when we return. I don't see why this has to be a problem." That was the thing about my mother. She always made sure I felt like the problem, like my feelings were an inconvenience, like asking to be treated as a person rather than a utility was an act of rebellion. And my father, gentle, quiet Richard, walked through the door from the garage, caught my eye for exactly 1 second and looked away. He said nothing. He never said anything. Not when my college fund was redirected. Not when my achievements were ignored. Not when Diane was handed everything and I was handed the bill. He picked up a bag by the door and said, "Ready, Maggie." My mother smiled at him, and in that smile I saw everything. I saw the polished, curated version of family she wanted to present to the world, the beautiful wife, the doting husband, the successful daughter, the 3 adorable grandchildren. But I was not part of that picture. I was the scaffolding, the structure that held it up from behind the scenes, invisible and expendable. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They left just like that. 3 adults, 3 pieces of luggage, and not a single backward glance. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and I stood in the entryway of my childhood home, listening to the sound of the car engine fading down the street until there was nothing left but silence and the gentle babble of 3 children who didn't understand that they'd been abandoned any more than I did. I didn't move for a long moment. I just stood there, breathing, letting the reality of what had happened settle into my bones. The humiliation, the manipulation, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it all. My mother had cried on the phone. She had begged. She had used tears, real or fabricated, it no longer mattered, to drag me across the country for one purpose: to serve as unpaid labor so she and my sister could go live the life they actually wanted, unburdened by the children they claimed were their greatest joy. And I had fallen for it. Again. But this time, something was different. This time, the old crack inside me didn't fill with guilt or sadness or the desperate need to prove myself worthy of their love. This time, it filled with something else entirely, something clear and cold and precise. The thing I had spent my entire career cultivating, the ability to look at a situation, strip away the emotion, and see the leverage. I set my jaw. I picked up my suitcase, carried it to my old bedroom, the same small room with the same faded floral wallpaper, now repurposed as a storage closet with my bed shoved against the wall beneath boxes of Diane's old baby clothes, and I sat down on the edge of the mattress. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. 3 years ago, my maternal grandmother, Eileen, had passed away. She was the one person in this family who had ever truly seen me. She was the one who had sat with me through my law school applications, who had read every personal statement draft, who had told me, "Amelia, you are worth more than what they make you feel." And when she died, she had left me something that no one in my family had counted on: the lodge at Candlewood Point. Not the actual lodge, of course, but the property it sat on. My grandmother had owned the land and the original cabin for decades, long before it became a fashionable retreat. She had leased it to the resort operators on a 30-year term, and when that term expired, the property and all its improvements reverted back to the family trust. What my mother and my sister and half the extended family didn't realize, because they had never bothered to read the trust documents, because they had assumed, as they always did, that the details would take care of themselves, was that I was the trustee. My grandmother had appointed me personally, specifically, and irrevocably. She had told me, the last time I saw her, "You're the only one I trust to protect what matters." And I had protected it. Quietly, diligently. For 3 years I had managed the trust, renewed the lease terms, handled the tax filings, and never once used that power. Never once reminded them, never once leveraged it. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I opened the trust documents on my phone and scrolled to Section 14, Paragraph C, the revocation clause. As trustee, I had the unilateral authority to suspend access to the property for any reason, with 48 hours' notice, pending a formal review of the trust's terms. It was designed as a protective measure, a way to prevent misuse of the asset. But in this moment, reading those words, it felt like it had been written for exactly this occasion. I made a phone call, not to my mother, not to Diane. To the one person I knew would understand without explanation. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Amelia, it's 6 in the morning on Christmas Eve. If this is about the Morrison filing." "It's not. I need you to do something for me. Personal matter." A pause, the sound of him sitting up. "Go ahead." "I need you to draft and serve a formal suspension of access notice for the Candlewood Point Property Trust. Effective immediately. Send it to the Lodge Management Office and to the email addresses of Margaret and Richard Hargrove and Diane Hargrove Keller. I'll text you the details." "Amelia, are you?" "Marcus, please." His voice softened. "You got it, give me 2 hours." I hung up and stared at the ceiling. The children were chattering in the living room, unaware of anything except the present moment, the way children are. Emma had found a new doll and was cradling it gently. Tyler and Noah had somehow resolved their tablet dispute and were watching a cartoon with the kind of rapt attention that only children and the very naive can muster. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee. I found the schedule my mother had left on the fridge, a detailed, color-coded document that specified nap times, meal times, acceptable snacks, and emergency contacts. It was thorough, I'd give her that. She could be remarkably thorough when it came to organizing other people's labor. I sat down at the kitchen table with my coffee and waited, because I knew something my mother didn't. I knew that the lodge at Candlewood Point required trust authorization for any booking. It was in the lease agreement, a detail the management office enforced faithfully because my grandmother had insisted on it. If the authorization was suspended, the booking would be suspended with it. No suite. No check-in at noon. No coastal road traffic and no family trip. I sipped my coffee and let the silence settle around me. For the first time in 34 years, I wasn't the one waiting for someone else to decide my worth. They were going to have to come to me. It took less time than I expected. At 12:47, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen, and when I answered, the voice on the other end was unrecognizable. It was my mother's voice, but stripped of its practiced warmth, its careful modulation. It was raw, furious, almost feral. "Amelia, what did you do?" I was sitting on the living room floor, helping Tyler build a tower out of wooden blocks. Emma was asleep on the couch, her tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Noah was beside me, carefully selecting the next block with the intense focus of a surgeon. "Hello, Mom. How's the trip?" Don't you dare play games with me. We got to the lodge and they said the booking was canceled. They said the trust access was suspended. They said," her voice cracked, not with tears this time, but with rage. "They said you did it." I did. A sharp intake of breath. A silence so complete I could hear the coastal wind through the phone. Then, "You have no right. That property belongs to this family." "Actually, it belongs to the trust, and I am the trustee. You'd know that if you'd ever read Grandma Eileen's documents." Your grandmother would never." "Your mother," I said, my voice quiet and steady, "appointed me specifically, Mom. She told me I was the only one she trusted to protect what matters. And she put it in writing, in a legally binding, irrevocable trust document. I have the authority, and I exercised it." "You're being vindictive. You're punishing us because you're upset about." "Because I'm upset about what, Mom? About the fact that you begged me to fly 10 hours home under false pretenses. That you opened the door and didn't even say hello. That you summoned me here like a hired hand to babysit Diane's kids while you went on a trip you never intended to include me in. Which part, exactly, am I not allowed to be upset about?" "You're being dramatic. It was just a trip. We were coming back tomorrow. And I was staying here, changing diapers, wiping noses, alone, in an empty house, on Christmas Eve, while my family celebrated without me at a property I literally control. Do you see the irony, Mom, or is that too subtle for you?" Her voice dropped. It was the dangerous voice, the one I'd heard only a few times in my life, the one she used when she felt her authority truly threatened. "You will reverse this right now, Amelia. I am not asking." "I know you're not. You never ask, you demand, you command, you manipulate, but you don't ask. That's the thing, Mom. You could have asked me to babysit. You could have been honest. You could have said, 'Amelia, we want to go on a trip and we need help with the kids.' And I probably would have said yes because despite everything, I still love this family. But you didn't ask. You used me, again. And this time there are consequences." Diane's voice cut in. She must have been on speaker. "Amelia, you're being ridiculous. It's Christmas. You're ruining Christmas for everyone. For Mom, for Dad, for me. Is that what you want? To ruin the holiday?" "You mean the holiday I wasn't invited to?" "You were invited. You're here, aren't you? We wanted you here." "You wanted me here, Diane, not there." "There's a difference." You are so. This is exactly why we didn't invite you. You make everything so difficult. Everything has to be about you and your feelings and your boundaries." "My boundaries," I said softly. "Yes, those are the things you keep stepping over." My father's voice, faint and far away, as if he was standing at the edge of the room. "Maggie, maybe we should just come home." "Richard, be quiet." I closed my eyes. There it was. The same script, the same roles, the same dynamics. Margaret commanding, Diane defending, Richard silent. And me, the problem, the difficult one, the one who dared to ask for basic human decency and was called vindictive for it. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, and my voice was calm now, the way it was in a courtroom when I knew I held the winning argument. "You're going to come home. You're going to spend Christmas Eve with your children and your grandchildren, all of them, including the one you left behind. And tomorrow we're going to have a conversation, a real one, about how this family treats me. And if that conversation goes well, I'll restore the trust access. If it doesn't, I let the silence do the work. Well, I'm sure you can find another lodge." I hung up. They didn't come home, not right away. Instead, my mother called 3 more times in the next 2 hours. Each call was a variation of the same theme: anger, guilt, manipulation, threats, delivered in different proportions, like a chef adjusting a recipe she couldn't quite get right. The first call was pure rage. The second was a guilt assault, with my mother invoking my grandmother's memory, my father's health, my sister's fragile emotional state, and the children's right to a happy Christmas, all in the space of 5 minutes. The third call was Diane, trying a different tactic, sweetness or her version of it, telling me she'd always admired me, that she was sorry, that she hadn't meant it when she called me difficult. I listened to each message. I did not pick up. While they strategized from whatever coastal restaurant or roadside motel they'd retreated to, I did something I'd never done before. I fed the children. I changed Emma's diaper. I built a blanket fort with Tyler and Noah and sat inside it with them while they told me elaborate, breathless stories about dinosaurs and superheroes and a magical cat who could fly. I ate leftover casserole with them at the kitchen table, and when Emma knocked over her cup of milk, I cleaned it up without a second thought, and when Noah asked me to read him a story, I read him 3, doing all the voices the way my grandmother used to do for me. And something unexpected happened. Sitting in that blanket fort, surrounded by 3 small humans who didn't care about leverage or trust documents, or who had been wronged by whom, I felt something I hadn't felt in this house in years. Peace. Not the peace of resolution, nothing had been resolved yet, but the peace of knowing with absolute certainty that I was not the problem. I never had been. At 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Notice served. Lodge management confirms booking suspended. Property access revoked pending review. Let me know if you need anything else. And Merry Christmas, Amelia. I texted back, thank you, Marcus. Merry Christmas. At 5 o'clock, I received an email from Diane. It was long, far too long, and its length alone told me everything I needed to know about how desperate the situation had become. She had forwarded me a chain of correspondence between herself and the lodge management, in which she had tried every angle she could think of. She had cited the original lease agreement. She had claimed the trust documents were outdated. She had even threatened legal action, which made me smile, a real, genuine smile, because she was threatening to sue a corporate attorney over a trust she had never read, administered by her own sister. But then, near the bottom of the email chain, I found something that made me stop smiling. A message from Diane to my mother, sent before any of this had happened, before I'd even boarded the plane. It had been included in the thread by accident or perhaps by carelessness, the way the truth always seems to slip through the cracks eventually. The message read, Mom, don't worry, she'll come if you cry, she always does. Once she's here, we go, she won't make a scene, she never does, she's too desperate for us to love her. I read it 3 times. Each time, the words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were surprising, but because they confirmed what I had always suspected, what I had spent my whole life refusing to believe. I was not a daughter to them. I was a tool, and my desire for their love was not seen as something to be honored, it was seen as a weakness to be exploited. I screenshotted that message. I saved it. Not because I needed evidence, I had the trust, the legal authority, the leverage. I saved it because I needed to remember. I needed to remember the next time the guilt crept in, the next time my mother's voice wobbled on the phone, the next time I convinced myself that maybe this time would be different. At 6:30, I heard the car in the driveway. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in my hands, the children all asleep now, Emma on the couch, Tyler and Noah curled together on a pile of blankets on the floor. The house was quiet. The Christmas lights on the tree in the corner cast soft, colored shadows on the walls. The door opened. My mother walked in first, followed by my father, then Diane. They looked tired, rumpled, deflated. My mother's flawless makeup had faded. Diane's immaculate hair was coming loose at the pins. My father's shoulders were hunched, his eyes on the floor. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. Before you say anything, I said, I want you to read this. I turned my phone around and showed her the screenshot of Diane's message. The color drained from my mother's face. She looked at the screen, then at Diane, then back at me. Diane's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She had nothing. For the first time in her life, my sister had absolutely nothing to say. She won't make a scene, I read aloud, my voice steady. She never does, she's too desperate for us to love her. I set the phone down on the table. You're right about one thing, Diane, I was desperate, but you're wrong about the rest. I'm not anymore. My father, who had been standing behind them in the doorway, stepped forward. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I could remember, his eyes weren't turned away. They were right on mine, and they were filled with something I had never seen in them before. Shame. "Amelia," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." The silence that followed my father's apology was the loudest sound I had ever heard in that house. It pressed against the walls, filled the spaces between the Christmas lights, hung in the air like something physical and heavy, something you could reach out and touch. My mother recovered first. She always did. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted, and I watched the mask slide back into place. The one she wore at dinner parties, at church, at every public gathering where the narrative of our perfect little family needed to be maintained. But the mask was cracked now. I could see the fissures running through it, the desperate effort holding it together. "I don't think you understand the position you're putting yourself in, Amelia," she said, and her voice had returned to that measured, controlled register, the one that passed for calm but was really the sound of someone calculating their next move. "You're burning bridges, over a misunderstanding, over a trip." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Mom. A misunderstanding is when you accidentally leave someone off an email. You deliberately deceived me. You cried on the phone. You told me you missed me. You said the family needed me. And every single word was a lie designed to get me here so I could serve as free childcare while you went off to enjoy a property that I control. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a strategy." Diane stepped forward, her face flushed, her hands clenched at her sides. "So what? So what if we planned it? Your family, Amelia, family helps each other. Family shows up. You haven't been here in 2 years, 2 years. And now you want to act like you're the victim because we asked you to watch the kids for one night. You didn't ask, Diane, that's the point. You never ask, you arrange, you assume, you take. And when someone finally says enough, you call them difficult, dramatic, vindictive." I never said. I held up my phone again, the screenshot, her own words. "She won't make a scene, she never does, she's too desperate for us to love her." Diane's mouth snapped shut. A flush crept up her neck, spreading across her cheeks like a stain. My mother tried a different approach. Her voice softened, another mask, another tactic. "Amelia, sweetheart, I know you're hurt. I can see that now. And I'm sorry if it felt like we weren't thinking of you, but you have to understand, Diane needed a break. She's been with those children all year. She's exhausted. I just wanted to do something nice for my daughter." "Which daughter?" I asked. The question landed like a stone in still water. My mother blinked. "Which daughter, Mom? Because you have two. One you wanted to give a luxury trip to, and one you wanted to leave behind with 3 small children and a casserole. So which daughter were you doing something nice for?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. We all knew. My father stepped forward again, and this time he didn't look away. He looked at me with those shame-filled eyes, and then he turned to my mother, and something in his posture changed. Something I had never seen before, a straightening of his spine that wasn't performance but conviction. "Maggie," he said, "she's right." My mother's head snapped toward him. "Richard." "No, listen to me. For once in your life, listen." His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that filled the entire room. "I've been quiet for 34 years. I've gone along. I've told myself it was keeping the peace. But it wasn't peace. It was just silence. And our daughter, our eldest daughter, has been paying the price for that silence her entire life." He turned to me, and his eyes were bright now, not with anger but with something that looked terrifyingly like grief. "Amelia, I watched your mother redirect your college money to Diane. I said nothing. I watched her dismiss your graduation, your bar exam, every milestone you ever achieved, because Diane was always the one who needed more attention. I said nothing. I watched you leave this house 2 years ago with a smile on your face and tears in your eyes, and I let you walk out that door because I didn't have the courage to stand up and say, 'This is wrong.'" His voice broke on the last word. He pressed his hand to his mouth, collected himself, and then dropped it. "I'm sorry. I'm more sorry than I can say, and I'm not going to be quiet anymore." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. He held it up so my mother could see the screen. "I'm calling the lodge and canceling whatever's left of the reservation. Permanently. And then I'm going to help Amelia make coffee and sit down with those children, because they are our family, and they are here, and that is where I should have been all along." My mother stared at him. For the first time in my life, she was speechless. Not calculating her next move, not adjusting her mask, just still. The architect of our family's dysfunction, confronted at last by the one person she had always counted on to remain silent. Diane looked at her mother, then at her father, then at me. Her face was a war, pride and defensiveness battling against something unfamiliar, something that might have been the first fragile seed of self-awareness. She didn't apologize. Not then. But she sat down. She sat down on the couch next to her sleeping daughter Emma, and she put her hand on the little girl's back, and she didn't say another word. My father made the call. He canceled the reservation, his voice calm and steady, the way I'd never heard it before. When he hung up, he looked at me and said, "What do you need, Amelia? Whatever it is, I'm here." I looked at this man, this quiet, complicit man who had finally found his voice at an age when most people stop looking for it, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not resentment. Hope. Small, fragile, uncertain hope. "I need you to mean it," I said. "Not just tonight, not just when it's easy, always." "I will," he said. "I will." The aftermath was not a movie ending. There was no sweeping orchestral score, no tearful embrace that erased 3 decades of neglect. What there was instead was quieter, messier, and more real than anything I had ever experienced in that house. My mother retreated to her bedroom and did not come out for the rest of the evening. I heard her voice through the door once, low and strained, on the phone with someone, probably her sister, probably rewriting the narrative already. But she didn't come out. She didn't try to regain control. For the first time, Margaret Hargrove had no script, no strategy, no audience to perform for. And so she did the only thing left to do. She sat with the silence she had created. Diane fell asleep on the couch next to Emma, her arm curled protectively around her daughter. When I covered her with a blanket, she stirred just enough to murmur something that might have been, "Thank you," or might have been sorry. It didn't matter which. The wall between us had cracked, and even if it wouldn't come down entirely, a crack was something. A crack was where the light got in. My father and I sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, drinking coffee that had gone cold long ago, talking, really talking. He told me things I had never known, that he had wanted to be a teacher, that his father had pushed him into business, that he had spent his entire marriage choosing avoidance over confrontation because he was afraid of losing the family he loved, only to realize he had been losing them anyway, one silence at a time. He told me he was proud of me. That he had always been proud of me, that he had just never been brave enough to say it where my mother could hear. I cried that night. Not the hot, angry tears of betrayal, but the quiet, cleansing tears of something being released. I didn't forgive him entirely, not yet. Trust like that doesn't return in a single conversation, but the door was open. For the first time, the door was open, and I could see a path through it. In the weeks that followed, the consequences unfolded with the slow, inevitable gravity of truth. My mother's social circle, the network of friends and relatives she had so carefully cultivated, began to hear the story. Not from me. I never said a word to anyone outside the family. But my father, in his new resolve, told the truth when people asked why the lodge trip had fallen apart. He told his brother. He told his neighbor. He told the woman at the grocery store who asked how Christmas was. And each time he told it honestly. We treated our daughter poorly, and she stood up for herself. She was right to do it. My mother's reputation, the one asset she valued above all others, began to shift. Not collapse exactly, but soften, crack, reveal the seams. People who had admired her from a distance began to look at her more closely, and what they saw was no longer the polished matriarch, but the woman behind the curtain, the one who had summoned her eldest daughter across the country under false pretenses and left her alone on Christmas Eve with 3 small children. It was a small town. Stories traveled. And this one had legs. Diane, to her credit, eventually called me. It took 3 weeks, and the conversation was awkward and halting and full of long, uncomfortable silences, but she said the words. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have written that message. I shouldn't have treated you like that. "I'm sorry." She didn't qualify it. She didn't add but. She just said it, and that, I knew, had probably been the hardest thing she had ever done. I restored the trust access 6 weeks later, after my father and I had a series of conversations about the trust's future, about transparency, about how the family's assets would be managed going forward. I made it clear that my role as trustee was permanent and non-negotiable, and that any future use of the property required my written consent. My father agreed without hesitation. My mother agreed through clenched teeth, which was the closest thing to a concession she was capable of. I also used my professional network to connect my father with a counselor, a gentle, measured man who specialized in family dynamics and the patterns that keep people trapped in cycles of silence. My father went willingly, every Tuesday at 4 o'clock, and when I called to check in, he would sometimes mention something the counselor had said, turning it over in his mind like a stone he was learning to read. My mother did not go to counseling. But she did something else, something small and unexpected. In March, on my birthday, a day she had forgotten more often than she remembered, a package arrived at my apartment in Chicago. Inside was a photograph I had never seen before. Me and my grandmother Eileen, sitting on the porch of the Candlewood Point cabin, the lake behind us, the sun on our faces. I was maybe 8 years old and I was laughing, really laughing, the way children laugh when they feel completely safe and completely loved. On the back, in my mother's careful handwriting, were 4 words: "She saw you, I'm trying." I propped the photograph on my desk, next to my law degree and my bar certification and the framed letter my grandmother had written me the week before she died. And every morning when I sat down to work, I looked at that photograph and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but the possibility of it. The door was open, and the light was coming through. I was no longer the woman who knelt on a bathroom floor, hoping a phone call would make her feel loved. I was no longer the woman who flew 10 hours on a promise she knew was hollow. I was Amelia Hargrove, attorney, trustee, daughter, sister, aunt, and I was, at last, my own.